I'm Brother Jordan. I'm a novice of the Western Dominican Province, and our novitiate is here in San Francisco. So I'm glad to be with you this year, and it's almost over. We haven't been able to connect as much as normal, but in June it's a special month for outside ministry. Outside of the priory, so I thought it was a good opportunity to get in touch with some of the people in the parish and to give some talks and to lead some discussion groups as well. So we just have a month, but we'll try to become as much friend as we can be in a month. So I'm really glad to be with you. So we will start with a short prayer, actually maybe a long prayer of St. Thomas Aquinas, and at the same time it will give some time to the people on the live stream to adjust the sound if I'm speaking too loud or not enough. So it's a prayer by St. Thomas Aquinas, and it is a prayer for the attainment of heaven. So it's a very beautiful prayer. And I thought it would be really appropriate for tonight's talk. O God of all consolation, you who see in us nothing but your own gifts, I entreat you to give me, at the close of this life, knowledge of the first truth and enjoyment of your divine majesty. Most generous rewarder, give to my body also the beauty of lightsomeness, responsiveness of flesh to spirit, a quick readiness and delicacy, and the gift of unconquerable strength. And add to these an overflow of riches, a spate of delights, a confluence of all good things, so that I may rejoice in your consolation above me, in a place of lowliness below me, in glorification of body and soul within me, in delight of friends and angels all around me. Most merciful Father, being with you, may my mind attain the enlightenment of wisdom, my desire the fulfillment of its longing, my courage the praise of triumph. For where you are is avoidance of all danger, plenitude of dwelling places, harmony of wills. Where you are is the pleasantness of spring, the radiance of summer, and the fecundity of autumn, and the repast of winter. Give, Lord God, life without death, joy without sorrow, that place where reigns sovereign freedom, free security, secure tranquility, delightful happiness, happy eternity, eternal blessedness, the vision of truth and praise, O God. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So can you hear me well in the nave? Or it's just like limit, or I could speak even louder? No? It's pretty good? Top notch? Okay. Good. So, how to live a well-ordered life. It's a really broad subject, but we will start to have a kind of a little introduction tonight. So, to be happy or not to be happy, that is the question. Maybe you recognize that sentence. To be or not to be? Well, we could say to be happy or not to be happy. That is the question. That's what all our life is about, actually. Because when we talk about a well-ordered life, we're also talking about the question of happiness. And everybody wants to be happy. Raise your hand if you don't want to be happy. No, I don't know anybody who says, I don't want to be happy. It is impossible not to want happiness, even if we were trying not to want happiness. If someone was saying with his lips that he is not searching for happiness, he would be lying, because his lips would say the opposite of his heart, who is searching for happiness. It is impossible for someone not to want his own happiness. Even someone who is trying to kill himself is searching for some kind of relief from pain and suffering, and ultimately is searching for happiness. You can be wrong on what happiness really is, and you can be wrong on the means you take to get to happiness, but that's another question. And indeed, as you can see, there's a lot of loose and possibilities on how you can search for happiness. You just have to look all around you, how people are living all around you, many different ways of living the human life. But whatever you do, it is always motivated by this main striving for happiness, and this idea that somehow what you are doing will get you closer to perfect happiness. So what I find interesting is that in recent years, there has been a lot of multiplication of surveys, indexes, and reports to quantify happiness. A lot of studies on happiness. And people try to compare countries on the criteria of happiness. They are trying to find where is the place where the people are the most happy, the happier. And maybe it's a sign that in some way we have kind of lost the common sense of what happiness is, actually. We feel a need to quantify happiness with our criteria and to evaluate each country in order to find which one embodies the most or humanist and atheist criteria. And then we find the best country, we do a standing, and we conclude, well, everyone should try to imitate this country. So we have a couple of international organizations, including the United Nations, who are publishing results every year. It's called the World Happiness Report. There's also other kinds of reports like that. I just named two others. Human Development Index and the Better Life Index. And I was talking about the World Happiness Report. It's usually published around March 20 of every year for the couple years, for the past decade maybe. And March 20 has been proclaimed the World Day of Happiness. So if we are at the point of needing a World Day of Happiness, maybe it shows that something is not turning right, because happiness should be part of our everyday life. The criteria of all these reports vary a bit, but basically it's always around the same themes: life expectancy, education, per capita income, PCI, generosity, social support, freedom to choose, what it means, security and limitation of corruption, lodging, social bonds, care for environment, work-life balance, and people satisfaction. One of their criteria is that they ask people, well, are you happy living here in this country? So that's a good way to, that's probably the best of all these criteria, actually. So they ask directly to people. And there are some minor differences among all those standings, but there is one country that is always among the first places, and personally I think that we should all move there, so be ready to be convinced, but because I think I have really good arguments. So I don't know if you're able to figure out which one it is. It's not United States of America. It's Norway. Well, there's different standings, but Norway is often in first place or around the first place in all those standings. So what is so nice about Norway? Why is it the best country in the world to be happy? Well, let's see. Well, first reason, I will try to give some explanation. You'll see it's not very serious, but it's my tentative to explain why Norway is in first place. So, in Norway, a lot of people are going to work by cross-country skiing, so that's a pretty nice thing to go to work skiing. That's a great thing. Another thing that is special about Norway is that they have a lot of fish, so people don't just eat meat, so it's good for their health. They have a lot of forests, so they have a decent air quality there. It's not like San Francisco. And surprisingly, we think of Norway like it's up north, so it's really cold, but actually the major part of the country is reputed to be very temperate, to have a very temperate climate. So it was surprising to me, but I guess that's a good feature to have, a nice a nice climate. A good part of the country has a sea coast, so that's good for commerce because they can export their stuff and import stuff from elsewhere. Most of the men look like Vikings, so criminals are afraid to come because they are afraid of Vikings, so there are less criminality there. People feel more safe. They also have cool music. They have their own pop singers, but the only difference with the pop singers that we know in the United States is that they have braids. So Norwegian pop singers have braids. So that's a nice thing about Norway. It's also a very democratic country. There's no joke about this image. And it's also a very open country. It's known to be a country that is very liberal and on many social issues. So a leading country in a lot of social issues. Avant-garde. And I don't know if I mentioned it already, but people go to work cross-country skiing, so that's a really good thing about Norway. So you understand that I'm having a bit of fun here, as you can see, but my point is just to say that relying on some organization to teach us the path to happiness is kind of special in a way, because all they have to offer basically, even if it's more serious than what I'm presenting now, all they have to offer is an atheist and humanist vision of the world. There's no mention of God, there's no mention of heaven and the way to heaven. And most of these organizations actually have a very little expertise in indicating the real path to happiness. And even if their criteria were better than what I said earlier, well, it would be false to think that, as they do in their standings, that happiness has only to do with exterior circumstances. Actually, happiness has way more to do with interior dispositions inside of me, more than all the exterior circumstances around me. And just an example, well, in general, there's I'm not an expert on this, but I know it's true. There's way less anxiety and depression in Africa, for example. Even if all the exterior circumstances sometimes are not the best in the world, but people are happy there. A lot of people are very happy, actually. Africans don't have the monopoly of happiness, but let's just say I think they beat any other place in terms of community spirit and joyfulness, actually. Even if exteriorly they wouldn't make the first ranks in all those standings from the United Nations. But community spirit and joyfulness and gathering around the real things of life, well, that's not the kind of things that those well-thinking reports will indicate, actually. So anyway, so I just said, happiness has a lot more to do with interior dispositions. And it brings the question, well, what part of me has to do with happiness? What inside of me, which part of me has to do with happiness? That's another good question. And a related question to that was haunting me for a long time, even before my comeback to the Catholic faith. I was asking myself, why people are generally not comfortable to guide their life principally with their head, their reason, their intellect. A lot of people are not really comfortable with this idea. And I think this malaise is pretty spread among average people and also among Catholics. Many Catholics would say that intelligence is a great gift from God, but there's often a but that they had at the end of the sentence. It's a great gift from God, but... So I had this question for a long time. What is the malaise with the idea of searching happiness with your intellect? So that's one of the questions I had. Because if the head, the intellect, is not the guide, well, spontaneously we would think of something else inside of us. Maybe you figure out what it is. The heart. The heart. And from there, this conception that maybe I should follow more my heart than my head, often arise this idea of opposing these two, the heart and the head. I have a couple images from Google. So here's the first one. So an image showing a battle between the heart and the head. It's a brain. Doesn't look obvious, but it's a brain. So a battle between the heart and the head. Well, is it the case? Is it really like that in us? This idea of a tension between the heart and the head. This idea of the balance of power. So they're trying to see which one is stronger. This idea of, I really like this image, I think it's interesting, of inner division. So on one side the heart, on one side the head, and it's kind of dividing the person. Another image. So we can think of the opposition between the heart and the head like an argument between irreconcilable enemies. But are they enemies? That's my questions. So sometimes people will say, well, you're too much in your head. Maybe you've heard that before. Or sometimes they say, you need to go down from the head to the heart. You need to go down from the head to the heart. Some other people used to talk of intellectual people in a pejorative way, a bit like if the intellect was only for them and not for others. I barely exaggerate here, but they say things like, intellectual people are useful for society. We really need them, but let's face it, they also have great limitations. Intellectual people don't always have consideration for feelings. They don't have compassion. They struggle to understand others. They are kind of jammed here in their head. I'm not saying that I don't partly agree with all those things that people are saying about intellectual people, but I'm just wondering what is true and what's not. I did a short research on Google, again, head versus heart, not only with images, but other kinds of results, and it's pretty abundant. You have all kinds of results that you obtain when you search heart versus head. You have all kinds of formations for companies about relationship and dealing with human resources, head versus heart in a work context. You have pseudo advice for dating relationships. You have some teachings on spiritual life, head versus heart. It seems like a legit question for a spiritual life. That's why I'm talking about it. But what is often common about all this information about head versus heart, most of the time, is that the conclusion, the bottom line of it is the following. People say, in the end, that's the bottom line. Often they will say, listen to your heart. That's the most important thing. Listen to your heart. So another question, well, is it a good or a bad advice? I mean, it sounds good, but what does it mean? I guess it depends what you mean, actually. But my point for the moment is just to say that the bottom line of all these discussions about head versus heart is some kind of primacy that is given to the heart, actually, over the head. So maybe you start to see a bit what I want to address with these talks. And I really want to try to present the question in its most frequent expression. So I've decided to pick an example that I think is representative of what a lot of people are thinking. There's a video on YouTube. Her name is Alina. She's a young Christian in a Protestant community. And she recorded a video. The title is very simple. It's Head versus Heart. That's the subject of our video. So I thought, well, it's probably interesting. So if I try to summarize, she says, I never really understood when people were telling me that I was thinking too much with my head and not enough with my heart. And then she says that she had a kind of a revelation recently when she heard a quote of a theologian, Henry Nouwen. That's the quote. He says, many people define a human being as a rational animal, but what makes us human is not our mind, but our heart. Not our ability to think, but our ability to love. So, what should we think about that kind of statement? We are really, I think we are used to hear this language. We are used to talk about the heart as the center of our being. So spontaneously, it feels like it makes sense. And we would like to give our assent to that. But I think a legitimate question remains. What does that mean? Listen to your heart. What does that mean? It feels very natural, and at the same time, it's kind of still very confused. One might say, well, listen to your heart. It's not something you can explain. You just feel it. Well, but if you're trying to live a better life, I think it's legitimate to want to understand what what you mean by listen to your heart. Because if we're about to take this as kind of a motto or a slogan, a principle of a central principle in our life, well, it's better to know what it means. Listen to your heart. And it takes me back to one of the first questions I've said. What is the malaise with the idea of searching happiness with your intellect? And we could speculate a long time on this, but I try here a first quick tentative answer. I'll come back to that in the next talks, in the next weeks. But here's kind of a first draft. Well, maybe a lot of people have maybe the impression that if they follow their head, they would miss something of reality, that they would miss something essential. The impression that they would be less closer to reality, actually, that they would be kind of disconnected to reality. And I think it points something really important here, that we have a strong and natural desire to stick to reality in life. We want to be the closer possible to reality, to avoid being disconnected from reality. I think one of the worst things that we can imagine is probably the idea of living in illusion or in a lie, to live out of the track. Or that maybe people around us are saying about us, oh, he or she doesn't live in reality. He doesn't see things straight. He's just out of the track. He's not connected. So one of my goals with these talks, this series, is to actually reconcile the head and the heart, to find a good balance. There's another image that I like. I think it's great. This man walking and trying to keep the balance. And also to give back confidence in the intellect, because it feels like most of the time the conclusion is that we should follow more our heart than our head. So we will see all those things. So 4 teachings, 4 weeks. And the program is pretty simple. It's kind of a guided tour of your soul, a guided tour of yourself. You know yourself. You're living with yourself for 24 hours every day. But I hope that these talks will help you to get even a better knowledge of yourself and what your soul looks like. Because I think that if you know yourself better, there's a good chance that you will live a better life. So the first talk tonight, we kind of explored a bit like kind of the land. We explored what are some of the questions, what are the difficulties, the problems, a lot of the sentences that people agree with and that maybe we should question. Next week we will see what the head is not. The head is something and the head is not something. So there's a lot of ideas of what the head, the intellect, the reason is, and we will kind of push away some false ideas about what the head is, and also what the heart is not. So some false ideas about what the heart is. The third talk will be more on what is actually the head, the reason, the intellect. And the last week will be on what is the heart, and what the heart and the head have to do with happiness on earth and happiness in heaven, actually. So I repeat, my goal with that, our goal is to stick to reality the more possible. because nobody wants to live in illusion. My goal won't be to say that the head and the heart are equal. It's not kind of my style to say those things. My goal won't be neither to say we can't compare them because it's different. Also not my style. Actually, we can compare things because they are different. That's why we can compare them. No, my goal is to get as closer as possible to reality and to go to reality with you, so that we live in truth and in what is real. So I'm getting to the end of this first talk. I know it might sound a bit frustrating because I know some might say, well, he didn't talk about anything tonight. He just kind of did a kind of an introduction. He basically opened a door and he stayed on the threshold. He didn't get in at all. Well, for those who know me a bit, they know that I don't like to rush things. I'm a pretty slow kind of person, actually. But having said that, I think that still we have contemplated a few important things tonight, even if it feels like, well, it's just an introduction. Namely, if I just repeat some important conclusions. First of all, it's impossible not to desire happiness. Second, there are many different conceptions on what happiness is and how to obtain it, just to acknowledge that. 3, even if exterior dispositions are not to neglect, happiness has more to do with interior dispositions. We've talked about that a bit. 4, we talked about the malaise of many people with the idea of taking the intellect as a guide in their life. 5, we acknowledge a common opposition that people make between the head and the heart, and the primacy that is often given to the heart when they say, well, listen to your heart, that's my best advice. Number 6, we address the question of what makes us more human, and we had Alina and some other people are saying the same thing, that what makes us more human is our heart, our capacity to love. So just to acknowledge that that's really a frequent idea around us, a very common idea. And 7, I tried to give some possible reasons why people are not comfortable to follow their head, their reason, their intellect in life. So fear of missing the essential, fear to live in illusion or in a lie, and this natural desire that we have to live in reality and not to be disconnected from reality. So that's the program this month. The goal is what Socrates was giving himself as a slogan. He was saying, let's go to the truth with all your soul. Let's go together to the truth with all our soul. So that's the program. That's what I want to do with you during this month of June, with 1, 2, 3, 4 talks on this topic. So thank you. Do you have any questions on what I've said? Or now it's the question period. You have any question on things that you would like me to talk about in the future talks, or yes?
Looking at things from the perspective of behavioral economics,
Uh-huh.
I know that human beings are very bad predictors of their own happiness. Like we think things will make us happy, right? But often then we get them and they don't actually make us happy. So I guess I would hope that that's something that you would kind of address in your talk in the future and address it now. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. what are the real way of finding real happiness? Yeah.
The other thing is a comment you said on the interior disposition.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for economics, there is people have a set point of happiness that typically they come back to. So like, for example, you could win the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
You could temporarily be very, very happy, right? But eventually you'll go back to your set point of happiness unless you actually work to adjust that set point. Likewise, you could be in a debilitating accident and not be able to walk again.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be very depressed for a while, but then normally you go back, you adjust and go back to your set point of happiness. So kind of maybe talking about how does one adjust your set point of happiness, that interior disposition.
Okay, good. Yeah. So the question is, for those online, the question is, will I talk eventually about this idea that most people have kind of a set level of happiness and how to increase that level of happiness in a stable way. So yeah, that's for sure. That's something I will talk about. I will talk about the different faculties of our soul. And I think that when you have a better knowledge of who you are, I think it gives you a better idea of what kind of joy you should look for, and to know yourself more. I think it is satisfying as well. I think when you know yourself more and how you're made, and what's the goal, I think you have very good tools to go through life, even if there's a fluctuation of exterior events in your life that are not always joyful. So yeah, happiness is definitely something that has to do with a stable disposition, union with the best things, God and His friends. So that's surely a good anchor to have for a sure level of high happiness, even on earth. And of course, I will probably make some distinctions on. There's a difference between earth and heaven as well. There's a certain level of happiness that we can have on earth, but ultimately we're conscious that it's not the perfect happiness that we're looking for. Ultimately, we're looking for something way more higher than earthly happiness. That's for sure. So I will talk about those things. That's for sure.